Want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us in our Lunch and Learn. We do these every other week with varying topics. This week's topic on accounts payable check processing. Going to focus on the options available to you within the standard system for processing of checks up to the point of actually printing the check. So for this conversation, it doesn't matter how you print the check, whether you send it EFT, paper check, through Print Boss, use of Positive Pay. Those are all questions for a different time. We have 45 minutes together. My goal is to spend about 30 or 35 minutes on the topic, open it up for questions at the end. So with that, thank you for coming. I'm going to muted and we'll get started. As I said, today our topic is accounts payable. We are going to focus on three areas, and that is check processing, the options available in check processing. We're going to look at miscellaneous payments, and then we're going to look at the distribution codes. The distribution codes really are not related to payments, but they are more related to where and how the invoice is created, and they fall into the miscellaneous payments avenue, which is why I rolled it in to this topic and this subject. So we'll go through and take a look at that as well. And again, we have about 30 or 35 minutes. Our goal is to wrap up here sometime between 5 and 10 after the hour. That will give you 5 to 7 minutes for any questions, and we will be out of here at 15 after the hour. Haven't missed one on time yet. Don't intend to start now. So with that, let's get going. We're going to take a look first at check payment processing. As you know, accounts payable's role is to take in the invoices from your vendors, process them through the invoice batch list processing, and then obviously we have to pay them in some way. So there's really three icons related to the payment side of a transaction, and that is the payment batch list, which works very much like your invoice batch list or any other batch list in the Sage 300 ERP system. We also then have what's called create payments, a function that we're going to look at in some detail, and another supporting function called control payments. And this is where we're going to start. I'm going to show you control payments, what you can do with it, and then we're going to roll down on how that works within create payments, and then we're going to roll down and look at payment batch listings and how we can process payments through those functions. So let's go ahead and get started. When we open up control payments, what we are presented with is a screen with two tabs, single document and range of document. Now, the goal of this is to allow you to preset some statuses of invoices. So if I go in here and pick a vendor, Chloride Systems, I can then go pick an individual document out of Chloride Systems, and I can then hit the little blue arrow and return the information. So I know it's an invoice. I know its date is 6/23/2020. By the way, all of our information will be in the year 2020. It's sample data. It's a $152 invoice. I can limit the payment that I'm going to make on it. So we've had some discrepancies, and we've come to an agreement that I'm going to pay $80. I can just type in $80 and save this, and then that is the amount that the check will process for. I can see the terms that I've agreed to, the due date that those terms will create, the discount date that those terms will create, the percentage and the dollar amount of the discount. Any of the fields that are not grayed, I can edit. So I can edit the due date, I can edit the discount date, the discount amount and terms, etc. I can also force this or hold this. Now, a force means that the next time I go through create payment process, which we'll look at in just a second, this will come up on the list regardless of what its due date or its discount date is. I am forcing it onto the payment list. Okay? If I hold it, it will not come onto the list at all. So it will be completely blocked from coming up on the list. Now, that doesn't mean I can't pay it. It just means I can't pay it with the process payments, the mass payment section that we're going to look at next. This will get blocked off of that list. So I can go ahead and do either of these, hit the process button, and now that document is updated to that new status. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. So now if I requery on this, this payment is on hold. Now I can come back and simply click and make it normal again and hit the process, and now it's in a normal state. So I can instantly change the status of this invoice in real time. So if I run a group of checks that we're going to look at in a moment, and there are 8 I want to withhold from that list, one of my options is to come here and hold those 8 in this process. The other tab that we have here is the ability to hold an entire grouping. So I can use account groups, I can use vendor numbers, I can use documents, I can use types, and I can use statuses. So I can come through and I can grab chloride systems just as we did before. And I can limit it to just chloride systems, or I could extend it to other vendors. I can say all of their invoices, and I want to change their status to force. Just like that, I've changed 8 documents to a force status. When I run the generate payments function next, all the invoices for chloride systems would come on, but not necessarily interest, debit notes, credit notes, or prepayments, because I didn't bring those into the status. So if I want to go back and change those to normal, same as the individual, only now I'm changing a group of documents. I'm moving all 8 of them from a status of forced back to a status of normal. Okay? And then lastly, if you remember here, I said I could change a payment limit. I could come in and set this to $80. Here I can come in and en masse clear all those limits. So if I want to wipe the slate of limited payments off, I can come in and clear those limits out rather than having to dig through them one by one and find them. Okay, so this is control payments. And the object, as I said earlier with control payments, is to use them in the next function, which is create payment batch. Okay, so this creates what we could do here one-on-one, and we're going to look at what one-on-one means as well. But now that I've done control payments, and I don't have to do control payments, they're completely optional, but now that I've done that, I can come into an AP Create Batch section. And in this AP Create Batch section, I can create call up a selection code that is predefined. So let's go take a look at that. If I go to AP Setup, there's a function right here called Payment Selection Codes. And I can come in here and edit an existing one, or I can create a new one. Now the object of these is to predefine what the Create Payment Batch does. So here I create a name, I describe the name, I can select what bank it comes out of, so I have access to any of my banks. I can restrict vendors that are only attached to this bank, and this bank is available to be attached directly to the AP vendor screen. So if I come into my vendor section here and I look at a vendor and I go to their processing area, we can come in and see how they are set up. And we're going to look at this in more detail a little bit later. So when I come into my, hang on one second, my control payments, I'm going to close that one. Like you, I can get lost. Here's my payment selection codes and my create payment section. So now that I created the create payment code, and I've identified the CCB bank, and I've identified that we're setting them up by due date, and I've identified range of information, exclusions, and optional fields. When I come over here and grab the one called All Vendors to start my process, I get whatever I have set up over here. So this is predefining what this looks like. Okay, so now that I've selected all vendors, it has predefined that my due date is the date that I'm working in. It is predefined that we're in the CC Bank. It has predefined that we're using due date rather than discount date and a combination of them. And it's predefined any other settings that I want to put in here. So the object of Create Payment Batch is to quickly analyze all the invoices that I have in Accounts Payable, and based on a set of criteria, create a batch for payment. So let's take a look at that. So it is 6/30/2020. I'm going out of the CCC Bank. I am doing things by due date, and I'm going to put in 12/31/2020. We're going to pay everything through the end of the year. We're going to pay 6 full months of invoices. And then I hit register, and what it does is it goes through and looks at everything that fits the criteria and comes back with a list of invoices that it wants to pay. And as you can see, it wants to pay a lot of vendors, and each of those vendors a lot of invoices. So when we come down to the end of this contract, it wants to pay out $53,000. Now that may be okay, that may not be okay, but typically we don't have the cash flow to pay everything through the end of the year. So let's shorten it up. If I pay through the end of the month, like this, and register it, you'll see that my list is much shorter. If I come through and do just 2 weeks, my list is a little bit shorter yet. It looks like most things are due on or about now. So now if I go to the end of this list, I can see that I have $35,000 that have to be paid. Now, that may be fine. I may be ready to go. But I also may say, hey, wait a minute. I've got a discrepancy with Exide Battery company right here, vendor number 1315. I don't want to pay them just yet. So I can pop over to exclusions here and type in 1350, right? Yep, Exide Battery. Okay, and then I can come back and re-register again. And now what we'll see when it comes up is Exide Battery is dropped off the list. Okay, other companies are here, but Exide has dropped off the list, and I've also changed my total down to $33,000. So the object of this is I can keep working this. I can say we're not going to pay any invoice in excess of $4,999, and I can re-register it. And each of these events changes the list. So now with the list, I can print the list. I can bring it to the controller or whoever is my cash management person and say, this is what's scheduled to be paid. Is this acceptable to you? Do we want to make additional changes to it? And if it is acceptable, then you simply come back here and hit the Generate button. And once you generate it, it creates a payment batch that we can now pay these vendors from. And we're done with this process. So if we take a look at that, we've now used control payments potentially to hold or force payments so that they come on or off the Create Payment Batch list. On the Create Payment Batch list, I was also able to add exclusionary information, additional specific information, to create a list of payments that we wanted to pay in this check run process. When I hit the Generate process, what it does is it comes over here and it creates the batch for me. And you will see them labeled as System Generated Payment Batch. And if I open this, I have 17 invoices, or 17 different entries, 17 different vendors with invoices ready to be paid. So here's Chloride Systems, here's Intercontinental Battery, here's Gould Manufacturing, etc. But now with, depending upon the rights that I have, we can restrict this or not restrict this, as we can with any of these steps. I can still come through and say, on a particular vendor, right here, we don't want to pay this one yet, for whatever reason. It doesn't matter what reason. Hit the delete key, delete the line, and now we're not going to pay that invoice. We didn't affect the invoice at all yet. We may have run it through Force. We may have generated it, registered it, and generated it in Create Payment Batch. It's sitting here in a batch, but we just removed it, which means absolutely nothing has happened to that invoice. It is going to stay on the AP ledger, and it's going to wait until the next time we run checks. Okay? I could do that with the entire transaction. I don't want to pay ESSER Engineering, so I can come in here and delete the entire entry number 6. And now ESSER Engineering will not get paid. And absolutely nothing has happened to ESSER Engineering or the invoices that are on there that wasn't already there before I hit Create and Generate Payments. So all I've done is create a payment batch. And I can continue to manipulate this batch. Now, that is the check processing. But we can now tie the function of miscellaneous payments and the function of paying invoices that have been vouchered onto the AP ledger by doing this. So optionally, I can open a new batch, a clear batch. I can go up to a vendor number, and I can find a vendor here that I want to pay. So if I find ESSER Engineering, because I just removed everything from them, I can come through and decide manually which invoices I want to pay for ESSER Engineering. Simply by clicking the yes, it will allocate this amount. I need to come in and tell it what my payment amounts are. So it comes in and says $78.48. And I could go through and add this, move on to another vendor, and I could add a payment again. So I'm going to actually add one from Chloride Systems. The reason I'm adding this is I want to show you what happens when an invoice for a vendor is already in another accounts or another payment batch waiting to be paid. So if I come in here to Chloride Systems, notice that many of these invoices are flagged as pending. And they're flagged as pending because they're back here in batch 28. In my first entry of batch 28 is Chloride Systems, and they are sitting here waiting to be paid. They're not paid yet. We have not printed checks yet. But the system knows that they're sitting here waiting to be paid. So when I come to batch 29 and I'm manually doing some payment processing, and I grab a vendor that someone else is processing payments for through a batch or through Create Payments, I can see that so that I don't inadvertently pay the same invoice twice. So I could come through here and say that, well, based on the conversations we just had, I need to get this payment out. It's already had payments against it. I need to get this last $60 payment out to them. It should have been included in the check run, but it wasn't, so I'm going to get it out to them today. So that is the process of invoices that have been vouchered onto an accounts payable ledger. We have multiple ways to create the payment entry batch, but ultimately everything ends up at the AP payment entry batch. This is the function that allows us to print checks. And we cannot print checks until we get through to this function. Okay? So now there's one other type of invoice that you may deal with, and that may be the walk-up. Whether it's getting pizza for the office or UPS showing up saying, I need payment for this before I can drop it to you, you can take any open batch based on security rights, and you can come in here and say that it is a miscellaneous payment. A miscellaneous payment can be applied to a vendor or not. Doesn't have to be. So if it's or not, you will have to write in some information on it. So you can come through here, you can print a check, you can come through and identify tax groupings, you can come through and identify other information that is related to this. So, you know, I can come in here right here to my remit to, and I can just say, you know, pizza shop. Yeah, pizza ship, okay. The pizza shop, or whatever I want that check to say. I can come through and grab, see here the distribution code. We're going to look at those in just a second. I can have a distribution code, you know, called office expense right here, and use that to assign the general ledger code for this $25 worth of pizza that I have to pay before they'll leave the pizza behind for me. Okay, so I can process miscellaneous payments through an AP payment entry batch. And just to finish up the function of an AP entry batch, let's go look at the other two things that we can do. We can do a prepayment, and a prepayment allows you to issue a check for a document that's not here yet. So maybe Marshall is sending us something, but they need to have payment before it comes, and I can come through here and say that I have to pay $500, and I want to attach this by their document number or my purchase order number or an order number. So if I have an order or quote number from them or a PO number, I can come through and grab that, and then I can pick one of my purchase orders from here. So I can come through and look at a purchase order that I would have outstanding, or if I don't have purchase orders installed and integrated, I can type in a purchase order number here. And then when I do my invoice later, as long as I put that purchase order number in the PO number field of invoice entry, it will align the prepayment to the invoice. So if it's a $5,000 invoice, when I key it in, and I put in this case, the PO number in the PO number field, then when I look at it, it will have an outstanding balance of $4,500 because it will apply the $500 prepayment. So that's the other option that you have here. And then the last is called applied documents, and applied documents allows me to take an outstanding credit that may be sitting on the account and apply it to an outstanding invoice that's on the account. So I can tie these two together manually. And let's just see if I can find a vendor. I actually did not look for this in advance. But if I come in here and grab something from Xside, apparently they don't have anything outstanding. Let's just poke around here a little bit. Yeah, okay, so I have to have some outstanding credit notes. But if I had a credit note that came in and was not applied at the time of entry to an invoice, what I have is I have two floating documents. They may equal zero. I may have a $500 invoice and a $500 credit, so when I run my AP aging and my vendor balances, the vendor balance is zero, but I still show these two details. Now, check processing will take care of that. If a check has to go out for a vendor, it will grab the credits and apply them to the invoices, and you won't have this problem. But if you purchase something, applied the invoice into the AP vendor, and then later returned it and they sent you a credit for the total amount, and you never process them a check, that's where you'll get into this issue. And you use the AP payment entry screen to tie those two documents back together again. Okay, so we've spent a fair amount of time here on the AP entry screen, and we want to now come through and take a look at this. The first thing that we want to do is we want to deal with this system-generated check. We've got 16 here because we took one out, and we need to get check runs out. So there's a print post button right here, and by hitting the print post button, it will come up, it will grab my AP check stock. I can confirm what check it's going to. I can predefine my printer if I wanted to. We're going to preview. It's set up the starting check number right here. I can verify that. Now, if you're using PrintBoss, there is no starting check number because you're generating the check number in real time. But if you are using printed checks, you can take the first check in the run and confirm that the starting number here is the same as the first check you're putting in your printer. Okay, so now I have gone through and gotten this up, and I want to go ahead and print these. So it's now doing the work in the background to pull these through. It is going to pop open, in our case, a preview screen with the checks up there. So you'll see here's Chloride Systems check. There's a bunch of different checks here. Based on the way you have people set up, you may get more than one check per vendor. That's a setting in the accounts payable screen. And all of the checks print through here. And if they're fine, and I dumped them to the printer and everything worked well, then when I go to close this, it's going to ask, were all the checks printed successfully? And if they were, and please don't answer this until you confirm that they are, because it's a lot of work, but once all the checks are out, once you've looked at them and said, yep, they're all perfect, you can hit the yes button and it will finish the process. But if for any reason the answer is no, got jammed in the printer, halfway through we ran out of check stock and it pulled 3 sheets of white paper at the end, whatever the reason is, if you say no here, what it'll do is it'll drop back and allow you to tell it exactly which documents did not print correctly. So we ran out of check stock, and we pulled 3 pieces of white paper at the end. Now again, if I'm on PrintBoss, I just let the check numbers run, mark the 3 as voided, and go on. But if I'm running, depending upon your controls, and if you're running pre-printed checks, you may want to roll this back. And then what you'll get is you'll get one, in bank services, you'll get one document number 15, 16, or 17 that is voided and one that is actual. So you'll actually get 2 of each of those numbers. And this depends upon your controls internally, how you want to do this. I'm just going to let the numbers keep running, and it will show 15, 16, 17 as being voided. There will be no 15, 16, or 17. So I'm going to go ahead and hit reprint here, and what it's going to do is spool up the 3 checks that I told it we had missed. Okay, and there's only 3 of them here. So now when I drop off that, they have all printed successfully. I hit the yes button, and it says it's ready to post. Do you want to finish posting the batch? Yes, I do. So that brings it full circle. So I now have vouchered the invoices onto the AP, used the control payments if that's the way I choose to manage checks, done the system, the create payment batch, reviewed them in the payment batch listing for accuracy, and printed them, handled a jam in the printer, and finally posted them all the way through. This batch is completed. It is done. But I still have batch 29 sitting here. So when I open this, I now can print this in total just like I did with the other batch. If I didn't open it and I simply hit print post, it would print all the documents that are in there. But I can also open it up and I can do just specific documents. And we're going to go back to this pizza one because the guy's standing here waiting for a check. So I stick a check in the manual tray. I hit print checks. It comes up with the next check number. I hit print, and it pops open a check to the pizza shop for $25. And I go ahead and print that, grab it, hand it to the pizza guy. He gives me the pizza. Employees are happy. Life's good. I hit close here, and I say, was it successful? Yes, it was. Now, what you'll notice is that this entry 3 is completely grayed out now. I can't do anything with it but void the check. but entry 1 and 2 are still available to me, as is entry 4 and beyond. Okay, so all I've done is in real time printed one check out of a batch of checks that I'm doing by hand. And some people like to do them by hand, particularly if you're in a real cash tight situation where you're picking and choosing what you're going to pay, or if you only have a few that need to be done and you're between major check runs, then you may elect to do them in this manual process. The key here is you have choices. And it tends to be my mantra when I talk through these lunch and learns. You have choices depending upon how you need to process things and how things work best for you. So use the choices that the system has. Try out the different ones. If you are, getting to the end and you're going to have 100 invoices to do, for goodness sakes, use the create payment batch, if nothing else, to get all 100 in there, and then you can start clipping things off if you change your mind. But to key in 100 invoices by hand when the system has a way to generate it for you is losing the value of the system, and we want you to get maximum value out of the system. All right, quickly, I got about 2 minutes here. I want to go through and I want to describe to you what the distribution codes and distribution sets are. So a distribution code is a way to relate a textual event, Amex, to a GL account number. And that's all it is. It is just simply the relationship of the two so that you can quickly identify, or a person who is unfamiliar with the chart can determine where to put this. That is the process, or the basis of it. A distribution set then is a group of those. So if I do book, I can now bring these 3 distribution codes onto my invoice or my miscellaneous check in real time. So let's go take a look at that, and that will wrap up and we'll go to Q&A. So if I go back to AP transactions, I go to AP batch listing, I open up this batch that I'm working on, and I create a new number 5 transaction, and I grab, we're going to put this to a vendor, but it's a new invoice coming in, and so I'm going to come down here, make it a miscellaneous payment, and I'm going to come down here and grab a distribution code. Notice it pre-populated a code. This is set at the vendor setup. So this vendor is predefined to go to a miscellaneous distribution code. I can remove that if I want. It is just a predefined, and I can pick a different distribution code. And I can grab any of them that I want to go through here. So this is the way that I can do it. Now, if I was doing invoice entries, I would have the option of grabbing a distribution set, and then what it would do is it would drop all 3 lines onto it, and I can predefine what those 3 lines are and just go in and populate their amount. And let me just do that quick. So here in invoice batch listing, if I grab a new batch and I grab a vendor, and we're going to voucher an invoice for a vendor, and I can come through here, I can put the document number in, and one of the things I can do is grab the distribution set right here, and we looked at that one called book. This was predefined to something else. So if I put a dollar amount in here, I can have it automatically split those based on some predefined pre-split, or I can come through and manually adjust those splits across the 3. But it's a great way if you've got an AP entry that's got to come in, it's got to be coded to 3, 5, 10, 15 different GL numbers, and we know roughly the percentage split between them. You can go through and build these so that it's much faster to voucher against them. And that is the use of distribution sets, used in the invoice entry, Distribution codes and sets can be used on invoice entry as well as miscellaneous payments.